Hello, everyone at OHBM, no matter what time zone you're in. I'm the chair for the Brainart SIG at OHBM, so that SIG is for Special Interest Group. We have a really hardworking team that have brought to you our exhibit for this year, which is Big Data and Me. And we have some of our exhibiting artists here today to kind of fuel the discussion on brain and art and how they interact, how they collide, how we can assimilate it in a yoga move, for example. Having said that, I will let each member introduce themselves the first time they speak, and then we'll go on with this really intriguing and insightful conversation. So welcome, everyone. And maybe we can start quickly with our Brainart SIG members, just like one-line introductions, and then we move on to our discussion.
Hi, I'm Valentina. I'm the secretary of the SIG, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we don't get many chances of talking face-to-face with the artists that contribute to our exhibit, to which we are deeply grateful. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you all for being here.
Hi, I'm Sridar Narayanan. I'm from the Montreal Neurological Institute, and I'm the treasurer of the Brainart SIG. And I'm also looking forward to our discussions today, and I've greatly appreciated the artworks that are on display in our exhibition, which you should go take a look at, and thank the artists for their participation.
I'm Natasha. I'm Brainart SIG member, and I'm a postdoc working with Professor Badhwar. And yeah, also just really excited to have this conversation, and I've really enjoyed looking at all the artwork so far. So thank you.
I'm Désirée Lussier. I'm the Brainart exhibition manager-elect. And I am really excited about this year's exhibition. I'm excited about every year's exhibition, but especially excited about this year's exhibition, especially given the fact that we do get this opportunity to interact with the artists today.
Hi, I'm Roselyne Chauvin. I'm a postdoc at Western University, and I'm the secretary-elect of the SIG, and I'm really happy to be a part of this amazing experience this year, and looking forward for this discussion, and thanks for the artists.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoltan. I sit in Zurich at the University of Zurich. I'm the chair-elect, so I have a lot to learn. So I will just watch and learn and take it over next year. Hopefully we can do another great event like this one.
Oh, hi, I'm Alain Dagher. I was the chair 2 years ago in Rome, and I'm here mostly as a supporter and a fan.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So Danica, can we start with you as one of our exhibiting artists?
Sure. I'm Danica Stanimirovic. I am neuroscientist by profession, a neurologist, but I'm also artist. So mixing the two, I don't know which comes first and which comes second, tightly intermingled. I work with the National Research Council of Canada, running a program in neurosciences, neurobiology, and in particular interested in vascular elements of the brain and blood-brain barrier. And in my free time, which is not that much, I sort of take what I see in the lab and try to sort of transport that into mostly visual expressions. And then I would say this year in particular, during the COVID year and COVID times, I've sort of gathered a small group of some fellow scientists and artists, some other people from different walks of life, to sort of share some of our ideas around art and sciences. So we call ourselves left brain artists. So one of our projects is featured in this exhibition.
Thank you, Danica. Susan, do you want to go next?
Hello, my name's Susan Aldworth. I live and work in London. I'm a professional artist and I teach at Central St Martin's Art School in London on an MA Art and Science. My work explores the relationship between the physical brain and our sense of self. I'm interested in the material nature of personality and I work in installation, print and film. I often collaborate with neuroscientists on projects because I think the brain is always someone's brain, and it's really important that in my work I deal with individual experience to explore the nature of consciousness. So I've done projects looking at sleep, epilepsy, schizophrenia, and dementia, and I'm intrigued about what neuroscientists know about the brain, and I think it's important for artists to respond to the imagery, also to question the assumptions of neuroscience, and to work with neuroscientists and to work with other artists and other people to explore the brain in all its magnificence. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. We really want to start conversing soon. So we'll go to Trina. Trina and Rachel just joined, so welcome. Trina, do you want to introduce yourself and your artworks quickly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Trina Lion. I'm an acupuncturist and I work in a psychiatric hospital in Baltimore. When we lived in Shanghai for 10 years, so during the end of that time, I started making comics about Chinese medicine for a journal in Shanghai. And so ever since then, I've been working on other comic projects about Chinese medicine for the general public, for people who don't necessarily have any familiarity with the topic.
I also want to mention at this point that we have a really good mix of diverse artists, even in terms of the topics that they have focused on. And I know Trina is really trying to, you know, mix the East and the Western philosophies, and at least introduce us more to the Eastern philosophies on life and health and art. So Rachel, welcome. What do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Rachel Scott. I'm about to be a second year student in Dr. Damozo's lab at Wayne State University. I'm studying behavioral and cognitive neuroscience. And I was really excited for this opportunity to blend my hobby with my personal research interests, which are focusing on what happens to memory and self-concept during healthy and atypical aging, such as neurodegenerative diseases. And when it comes to my art, I'm kind of all over the place. I love realism, I love digital art and traditional art. But mainly I typically try to focus on people, and I'm starting to branch out into landscapes as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Batool, I'm coming to you last but not least, because I know you have some slides to show us.
Yeah,
so if you could
share.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely. So Valentina, I'm not the host, so maybe you could.
Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Let me just put this on. Okay, so this was actually from a previous art and seminar that I presented on. So I'll just quickly go through them, and there's not too many in here, I hope. Oops. Okay, so basically I've been doing art since throughout my whole life, but I started when in childhood because my mom is into art as well. So I've always been fascinated by art, but going more into like high school and college, I started really dabbling in science, and that's when I really was trying to integrate the two. So this is just repeating some of what I said, but I continued on into getting a PhD or starting my PhD program in neuroscience at UC Irvine. I also completed my master's at Columbia in New York, and I've also been publishing or trying to publish more on basically cerebrovascular disease and vascular health and aging and Alzheimer's disease. So this is just a depiction and a visual that I made quickly, I think like a few months ago, but basically it's trying to kind of integrate how art and science are related. And if you look at the neuron, there's so many inputs that it's getting from all over from science or from art basically that are integrated. And you can see the outputs are including like interpretation and opportunities and discovery from the inputs of like detail and design and expression. So these are just a few examples of my work. And some things I love are just nature, coffee, my cat, and my closest friends and family. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Batool. So let's start some discussions. Should we do one of our artists want to start a topic?
Well, so I had an idea. So when Danica introduced herself, she was, she introduced her group as the left brain artists. And so my question is the converse of that. So how much right brain thinking has this allowed you to put into your science?
A lot. I think imagination, and just to preface the answer, perhaps, this is very common concept. I don't know whether it is fully scientifically true concept of left brain being more analytical and more sort of attuned to science and analysis, whereas right brain being creative and imaginative. Obviously, our brain is whole, so it communicates very closely. And the path from understanding the science and looking at how neurons communicate to imagining art from microscopic images is really the right brain working and creating that artistic imagery from something that's very scientific and meant to be analyzed. And the other way around is also true, that having that imaginative, unconventional views of certain scientific questions, especially when we start touching things like really memory or psychiatric or even perception of the world and perception of the art. It's very much driven by that creative nature of the right brain. But again, the symbiosis of the two, I mean, we are certainly, as personalities, more or less inclined in one way or the other. But, like benefits of like exploring different brains, either analytical or imaginative, is very, very important for art, for expression. And it also goes, I would say, for myself, I started very early on as very conceptual, symbolic artist, very object-driven, symbolism-driven, lots of analysis behind putting certain thoughts or concepts into paintings. And now these days, I'm very abstract. It's like a complete opposite. And this is something that really maybe is more right brain driven. It's like just an image that creates emotion or specific responses. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
Susan, you work a lot with medical images and brain. Do you have what would you like to say, add to this conversation?
Well, I think that if you think about it, until there was imagery like sort of MRI scans and other scanning techniques, the brain was always hidden away from artists, and it was only through dissection that you could ever get to see them. And now we have the ability to see living, working brains, and we see the imagery of the brain and the extraordinary beauty of that. And I think you know, it's possible to watch your, you know, I had a brain scan real time and I could watch my, you know, I could watch myself think. And so I think in terms of a new landscape for artists to explore, the brain is both object and subject at the same time, and incredibly interesting for that. So I think it's not surprising that so many people want to work with the brain now that we can see into it in new ways and have much more understanding of it. It's a, you know, it's an extraordinary thing to look at.
So Trina, I'll come to you next because I know you work in the medical profession, and we've often been asked at the Brainart SIG as to how art informs science. So do you have any insights on that, or vice versa? Like, how does science inform art? And, you know, because we're all, like, a lot of us here are kind of both looking at science and art. And for those of us who aren't, I would really like to come back to you and ask the question on how is science informing your artistic vision?
I think most of the time when I'm treating patients, I don't see them as art objects at all, and it's difficult to translate into something that's a static image. But when I do, it's mainly because for a lot of the patients that I have, they have a lot of diagnoses and clinical patterns. And so I'm doing the art to try to condense it and make it seem logical, even though it's not. I mean, there's nothing logical about suffering, and there's nothing linear about suffering. So I think that the only reason that I'm trying to capture it at all is for me to be able to sit more comfortably with being a part of, like, bearing witness to and also consistently treating human suffering. I also find that people generally have an emphasis on happiness and joy as a clinical goal and as a sign of health, which is not at all the case in Chinese medicine. So a lot of the time I'm spending re-educating people about what health could be or could look like. So part of that then informs the art to try to tell the general public that it's not just about happiness.
I find it really interesting that you say about, you know, suffering being non-linear, because as scientists, we're kind of working with a lot of data that's, or, you know, these diseases that are non-linear, they're, you know, heterogeneous, and groups where, you know, we're trying to get to a more individualized, kind of personalized medicine, but we have these big group data sets. And it strikes me that with your art, you're doing more at the individual level and kind of bridging that gap. Is that how you kind of see it?
I think I try, but I don't know if I always get there. But I think it's difficult because, at least here in the hospital, people are struggling with a diagnosis or a medication that doesn't necessarily treat all of their experience of illness. I don't, you know, no one modality can address all of their experience of illness. And I think it's very complicated for people. Westerners tend to be literal, and so they would like for there to be a literal, concrete, single explanation for why they are feeling the way that they are and how to resolve it. So yeah, I guess actually what you're saying, I do agree with it. It not only is it non-linear, but it's very unruly and very messy.
Have you ever tried bringing your art into the clinic? Like, either have your patients
I know,
see how they
right? Yeah,
respond?
Right. Yeah, I showed these. So the clinicians have all seen these comics. I've only shown other ones to the patients, ones that aren't this personal, because this one has a couple of patients that just discharged, and I'm worried about that for privacy purposes. But yeah, I have in the past, because when I convey something verbally, it doesn't always make sense. But if someone can see a visual of it with the same vocabulary, then it helps. It really helps. I mean, for one thing, I'm working in the realm of non-quantifiable energy, which isn't really in anyone's common realm. So it helps to see a visual.
It's interesting that you brought up non-quantifiable energy. I know Danica and I were having this conversation with the left brain artist a few weeks ago about the body releasing energy, and now the National Research Council of Canada seems to be able to capture some of this energy. Danica, do you want to comment on that? Is that commentable yet?
So it is a little bit more exact. Well, like we are pushing the limits of imaging and what imaging instrumentation can actually see. And that opens the whole new perspectives, right? And in the brain, like these days we can see many things, brain thinking, this beautiful tract, it creates a visual impact of seeing how the brain works. And these new sort of frontiers of imaging are now talking about quantum imaging, right? Being able to detect something that's still quite intangible, such as energy. So it's quite exciting on one end. On the other, interpretation of this is going to be very interesting. To a point that one of our collaborators is talking about this quantum imaging being able to a certain degree to unravel the mystery of consciousness. So it's maybe it's a little bit maybe still scientifically dubious, but opens perhaps an avenue for a completely new views of the brain, of personality, of personal traits and how they form.
Yeah, I find there's something funny about how Western medicine inevitably proves that that the Eastern medicine is valid. But that's awesome. I'm very, very intrigued by that work. When will that work be publicly disclosed?
It is still very early on. It's really embedded in a larger program on quantum physics and quantum imaging. So we'll see what happens. But one line of that, lots of that is really creating instrumentation. The one line is trying to apply this to biological systems and humans, and that's the part that is drawing our attention, and it's a little philosophical too.
Alain, you're a practicing clinician. How do you find this? Like when you see patients, do you discuss art? You know, like Trina, I know has mentioned how she interacts with her patients, but like, what's your take on it as a practicing clinician?
You know, in reality, it varies from person to person, but you know, the majority of patients are not there to discuss anything other than their care. And I'm sure it's the same for you. When you've gone to the doctor, I'm guessing you're not interested in discussing anything other than your problems, but then there are other people who are different. And, you know, I do like anyone, I have patients who are artists or who work in that field. And so we may have discussions of that nature. But given also that my practice is often you're there to solve, you know, significant problems of daily living, and we have a team approach here. Again, it's very rare that we engage in discussions. It's unfortunate because, you know, you're seeing people who are ill, who are not themselves anymore, and who have been, you know, who have been changed by their illness. And it would be important to remember who who they really are, which we often don't do. It's often, it's often shocking sometimes when you see patients and their family brings in photos of them when they were younger, and you see a whole person, which you don't necessarily do in the context of clinical care.
So it occurs to me that some neurologists like Bruce Miller at UCSF has actually studied the impact of neurological illnesses, in his case dementias, on art production. So people that have, either people who were artists or who took up art after the onset of their illness, and see what the changes over time are in the produced art, and how that changes with the illness and how it informs on the illness. And have you ever had the opportunity to do something like that?
Oh, I have not, but Valentina has worked in that clinic, so she may have more expertise there. Bruce Miller's work is really fascinating, very rich and just infinitely fascinating.
Absolutely, and so this is at UCSF, the University of California, San Francisco, and what they do is that they actively consider art on the two sides of the spectrum. So when it comes to patients' diagnosis, so when they are assessing the individual, they also consider this aspect. So it's not just about the language function and memory function, but the creativity and the personal expression of that person would be taken into account. And this is what allows them to notice this particular cases in which you might have a release of artistic talent as one of the symptoms, as one of the follow-up of the brain vision. And they also use art as a means of treatment and communication and help and support for any of their patients. Because for many, especially if language is compromised by your disease, art can be a way to release emotions, get in touch with your own emotion and with the emotions of the people you have around. So it's really beautiful to see how they have integrated art really all through the medical process, from diagnosis to treatment. It does take a special place and people committed to work on this integration, because it's not easy and it doesn't happen spontaneously.
Yeah, I remember talking to Bruce Miller and him saying that, sometimes especially when you have neurodegeneration with aging, you lose a lot of their functions. And, as clinicians or as in Western medicine, we tend to focus on what people have lost. But what we should also consider is what they have not lost or they might have gained. And we can reach these individuals through the functions that they have gained, because some of them do develop quite a bit of artistic talent in some conditions of neurological degeneration. Or, like even tapping into, especially in cases of Alzheimer's and stuff, like more primitive or deeper memories of color, of sound. You can often reach people with that kind of stimulus. So I was quite impressed when Bruce Miller mentioned that and taken aback. I'm like, yeah, why don't we use that more often? So okay, so on that note, I'm really curious to ask Rachel about her artworks and where her inspiration comes from.
The specific artworks that I submitted, or just in general?
Just in general, yeah.
Honestly, anywhere and everywhere, from dreams to personal experiences. I just draw little bits of experiences I have, and then I kind of try to personify them and bring them into the artistic realm. A lot of times what I'm trying to put down on a canvas is more of trying to capture like emotions, and then that manifests into people to express those emotions, or sometimes in landscapes. But I just try to emulate certain feelings and try to capture those.
So the themes of the works that you submitted to this, Rachel, to this this exhibit, have dealt with topics of inclusion and diversity. So can you maybe expand on how you address these topics in your artworks? Like what are the elements that you try to use to capture these topics?
The main elements I use to capture these topics is to just highlight individuals with diverse backgrounds by putting them at the forefront of my artwork. Majority of my artwork features people of color, and also tries to capture the experiences that they deal with, especially the struggle. I think one of the artworks that wasn't necessarily submitted for Brainart, but it's still like on like exhibit is Cotton Burned, and that's like speaking to the relationship that Black people have with slavery, and how and the emotions surrounding that kind of transverse time still today. And that's just like one example, but I want to highlight the joys that people of color specifically face, but also the realities of their experiences of people of color. And so I try to do that. Another one that I think I have on display was Monarch, which is this Black woman who has this large monarch butterfly on her chest. And that's supposed to emulate like the fact that she is a queen, and how she's standing proud and tall. And that's mainly just what I try to emulate, just both sides of the coin, the struggles that individuals with marginalized identities face, but also um, the beautifulness in their identities as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Uh, what kind of feedback have you gotten for your art, either from the OHBM community or from the broader communities that you've exhibited to?
It's mainly been positive feedback, which obviously kind of surprised me at first. Um, but just a lot of it has been surrounding representation and seeing a lot of people who hold these identities that I tend to put into my artwork just represented, because representation is an extremely powerful thing. It's difficult when you don't see people who look like you or sound like you or experience the same things that you do. And even just seeing that in a still image can be extremely powerful. And so I've had people talk to me about that and how they've found so much of their experiences kind of reflected in my artwork, which makes me happy, because at the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to emulate, is I'm trying to capture emotions and experiences as best as I can with a still image. But that's been the main feedback that I've heard regarding like my artwork, is that it really highlights underrepresented groups, which is what makes me happy.
No, that's great. That must have been extremely rewarding to get that kind of feedback.
I wanted to make a link with what we have discussed before. In fact, you saying that you got feedback on people and their expression, what they experience and what they can find in your art. And you're a PhD. Does that has been able to like inform your work?
I'm sorry, are you asking if my PhD like has been able to, and like my experiences with that have been able to inform my work?
Well, in general, we are doing research. We're in the lab. We sometimes can lose the contact with what is happening in the real life, and art can make this connection and enable us to get that feedback. It can be also, like Trina do with being able to explain, being able to get a visual feedback or representation for other people. So those expression were able to give you feedbacks that informed your work, or the other way around. Did you use your work, your PhD, to inform your art?
Yes, thank you for asking. I have. So previously, before this, I actually didn't really do artwork that focused on any of my research interests, which was kind of interesting. Because I think I had like this divider up where I kind of had like my academic interests and then I had my artistic interests, and there was never really a bridge between the two. And so that's why I'm happy for this opportunity, because I was able to um, bring things that I've learned so far in my PhD into my art, um, especially when it comes to like neuropathology and kind of having that inform how I proceeded with the pieces that I made. For example, if I hadn't used like my PhD to inform it, I might have drawn a brain really weird, or before I started it. But now, like I kind of had more of like an anatomical idea of what I wanted to do, and also more of an understanding of what people who are struggling with neurodegenerative diseases are going through, and so I tried to emulate that experience. But it's also as I've like gone through my PhD and I'm letting it inform my art more, it's also kind of emphasizing to me earlier. I think earlier we were talking about how does like science inform art or art inform science, and I think it's emphasized to me that at its core, science is art. It's full of innovation and creativity, and that's also why I'm happy for this opportunity, because it emphasized that to me, that it's all art at the end of the day. It's just how we go about it is different. And so I was happy to be able to bridge to the two.
If I may, I actually, oh, sorry. Because I have the feeling we have been touching on a lot of the similarities between art and science, and specifically about the power in communicating, whether it's communicating your identity, communicating your feelings, communicating your. But I do find another interesting similarity, and I would like to hear it's not for anyone in particular, but in general, for all of you, what you think about it, about the training. So I feel like both in science and in arts, you have a given talent, a given predisposition, a given things you like, you feel comfortable with, but then there's a lot of training and learning and growing and like improving yourself and improving your techniques. And I feel like in both cases, there's a never ending process of refining your talent. And since you are all at different stages of your career professionally and artistically, I wonder if you have any thoughts about this.
I think the relationship between the studio and the lab is very interesting. When I've worked with scientists, they are very creative spaces, and different methodologies go on, different sorts of rigor, but words like rigor and methodology do apply, I think, from my experience, to both art and science. The most exciting scientists I've worked with, and I'm sure they'd say the most exciting artists. I mean, the dialogue we have usually over a bottle of wine in a bar is extraordinary, and we end up in philosophy. You know, we're talking about ideas, we're talking about what it means to be human, why we do what we do, and so I think the delineation over time historically is a sort of pity, but I think artists and scientists know that they need to come together more, and I think there's a lot of interest on both sides to interdisciplinary practice and for us to start looking at what we can learn from each other.
So back to the Renaissance days and Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes, bless his cotton socks.
So,
Rachel, I really, oh, sorry, did I cut you off?
Go, Zoltan.
Yeah, thanks. So Rachel, please correct me if I paraphrase you, but I really appreciated your, the bravery of saying that, you know, science is just art anyway. And I couldn't agree more. I think we talk about, you know, does your art influence your science? Does your science influence your art? Influences your art? And I think in both professions, we're just trying to interpret what we see in the world. And we somehow put science on a pedestal, but it's still just an imperfect interpretation of the world around us, the way we experience it through our senses. And anyway, I just wanted to cut in there and just say I appreciate the bravery in making this statement, because I agree with it, and I think it would be important if this viewpoint was more accepted.
I completely agree, and thank you. I think it was Albert Einstein actually said that the greatest scientists are artists as well. So hopefully this understanding will continue to grow, because at the core of everything, it's creation and innovation. Sorry, you can hear my cat wanting to be involved.
Yeah, well, often the greatest breakthroughs come when we have sort of scientists with vision that are able to transcend the data that they have available and make a leap forward. And then you have to go back and fill in the blanks and prove things that statements that you make and support your ideas and conclusions. But at some point you need to make a leap and then go forward and then follow it up. And I think that's the artistic side of science. And you know, it occurs at many levels where art permeates science and the practice of science.
And it is probably in the opposite, it goes in the opposite direction as well. I think a lot of art is experimentation. So we were talking about training and becoming very skillful in particular media or building that skill. But I think these days we have on our disposal so many different types of media, and artists are explorers as well, trying digital, trying inks, trying different modes of expression. I think that experimentation sometimes brings about the most amazing ways of representing images or emotions or our artistic views.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of artists are partially chemists and engineers, and you know, trying to bring their ideas, their creations into a tangible form in the way that makes the most impact. So, I think, you know, that I absolutely agree that it goes both ways.
I also just wanted to add from what Danica was saying, like it's also just a history, so much history behind it, so that like scientists and artists are kind of building up on what has happened previously. So in science, for example, there's so much excitement towards this modern technology of imaging, but then what preceded was like the clinical science and the clinical neurology and psychiatry and psychology. So same thing with art, where you see all these phases of history just kind of building towards something new and something innovative. So it's interesting how kind of you take the history, but then you kind of try to innovate something new out of it.
I believe we have 5 minutes left. So if there are any burning last questions, this is the moment. Not to be shy, but to ask the difficult questions.
Questions or statements?
Exactly, or make the brave statement.
Or soliloquies, whatever turns you on.
I had a question, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, please correct me if I do, for Batool. Could you talk a little bit, like, because we've just been talking so much about like art influencing science, science influencing art, and your exhibit this year is very much focused on like these very gorgeous and diverse brains. Could you talk a little bit about your inspiration for your art exhibit this year?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. And it kind of goes back to what Rachel was saying about like representation and inclusion. So I'm trying to kind of gather and incorporate all these different aspects of diversity. And so you can see that through like the colors that I use, so, and the designs. So basically I'm trying to kind of integrate and make it interesting at the same time, that when you have all this inclusion, then there's something beautiful that grows out of it. So and I try to vary the designs as well based on kind of my inspiration from all different things like nature and even what I see under like in scans, like in diffusion tensor imaging, you see all the tracks. So I try to portray those, but in a more creative and colorful manner. So it's kind of interesting to just try to portray all these different elements, but then try to be creative at the same time about it. So thank you.
I particularly like the one that you had the brain, and you had like a cityscape in one hemisphere and a forest in the other hemisphere. And so what came to my mind was this tension between modern living and nature. Is that what you were getting at?
Actually, what in that piece, I was trying to portray two different types of jungles. So one is the actual like forest jungle, and then one is the concrete jungle. And it kind of goes along what you're saying, like having that tension between those two different types of forces, where you're kind of stuck in this modern life and going about the pace of like just go, 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 versus just relaxing and taking a deep breath in nature and kind of enjoying those elements as well. So, but yeah, it's supposed to be two different types of jungles, but and I hope I tried to get that in.
Yeah, and there have actually been scientific studies that show that humans need to spend time in nature. It actually improves your health, and you suffer physically if you don't do that.
Exactly, yeah. So there's a lot of studies on both like nature and meditation. So in terms of meditation, there's been links to how meditating in nature can be a lot more beneficial than just like taking a deep breath in the office. When you go outside for a walk, that kind of just improves your oxygenation levels, but also just calms down all your senses. So it kind of brings you back to like the baseline and kind of gets you functioning. And yeah.
I find that comment also very interesting, and in this particular year, we have been experiencing the lockdown pandemic in every different way across the countries, and the different restrictions that our government have put in place. So this is something that I guess a lot of people realize was needed to be able to get out, to go to nature, and spending less time on screen. That I guess you also as artists have been able to still collaborate with other online, but that bring a different dimension on the center. I know we don't have much time, but if you have some experience to share and
So I can give you just a quick example of that in the colors of the music. This is something that we are exhibiting here. So that was a collaboration of the whole Left Brain Artist group to create these brain tableaus that reflect our perception of different music tracks, and everything was done over Zoom. It was quite challenging. It required a lot of planning, a little bit of neuroscience, and how we want to transmit that. But it was a fantastic example of collaboration and engagement of the whole scientific group to create something that reflects us as a group, individually and as a group. So I think even in situations like we currently live in, where lots of things are happening through sort of Zooms and other technological means of communication, I think artistic collaboration is really possible and very rewarding.
So I guess just to expand a little bit on that, and this is open to all the artists. The pandemic has imposed a number of challenges on everyone, and we could spend hours discussing all the challenges. But I was just wanted to look at the flip side. What opportunities revealed themselves due to the pandemic?
Well, for me, there was time to reflect. I'm usually so busy that you just sort of move from one project to another. And actually, I had a lot of my projects got cancelled. So I had a best part of a year to think. And actually, it's been brilliant. I've thought about all sorts of things in relation to my artwork and my practice, and come up with a whole sort of new branch of ideas. So that's been the biggest opportunity for me.
I think for me, I kind of had the reverse. I actually, I went through a lot of struggles during the pandemic, and I lost a lot of people I cared about. And so I ended up actually losing my art and like my ability, I feel like, to art. No matter what I wanted to draw or paint, I couldn't really put it onto paper. But as I've like started to rediscover it and work on healing, I actually feel like I have an even closer relationship with my art than I did before, and I've come to understand just how intrinsic it is to me, and yeah, that's exactly. I wouldn't have. I mean, I don't appreciate what happened during the pandemic. I don't think anybody does, but I wouldn't really trade that closer relationship I now have with my art. So in a way, it kind of helped me discover more about myself and my relationship to
I think that's really nice. It's wonderful. It's nice to find the positive in any situation when it's possible. It's a nice triumph to achieve. So I'm glad you're back in your creative moment. Unfortunately, on that note, we have to wrap up. Our time is up. Thank you very much for everyone to come and join and have a chat with us. I hope many of you will join again next year. I will be the chair next year, and we'll try to create another space for you, another platform where you can express your feelings and your art and your emotions. So see you next year, I guess, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.